Hi, my name is Edward Atkinson. I am the Director of Sacred Music at Christ the King in Milwaukee, Oregon. My pastor is Monsignor John Sayek, and been here about a year. I grew up not at all with traditional music. I just played whatever my music director put in front of me. I played, guitar music. I played stuff that was jazz inspired. I played stuff that was pop inspired, and then sort of folk inspired from the 60s, that kind of stuff. And maybe once a year we did something that might have been considered traditional music. So we're making this series on sacred music and just kind of conversational, talking about sacred music, because it really needs to be something that we can talk about intelligently. There's something that usually happens in most churches is you talk about, they call them the worship wars, which is so terrible, but it's this idea of these competing camps, and I'm in the traditional camp and I'm in, this camp here and of what we've always done, or I'm in the let's change things up and do this, and these different warring camps, which I just think it's terrible. It's not a good way to go about things. So I wanted to make this series and just share my experiences with sacred music, share some about the church's teaching on sacred music to try to help everybody to understand what this is all about so that we can discuss it intelligently, we can really understand the richness and tradition of sacred music and where it all comes from. Let's talk about the origins of sacred music and of chant and how all of that came to be. So we're going to rewind our clocks all the way back to 2000 BC, and you have ancient Judaism and the Jewish culture and psalms and singing, and there's a system of notation and melodies and all this kind of stuff. Get to the 700s and 600s, and you get ancient Greece, and this is BC, ancient Greece and ancient Rome and so on. So what happened was 2000 BC, Judaism, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and they all collide together in the time of Christ. So we go through the time of Christ, and then we go through the Christian persecution, the first few hundred years of Christianity. And because of that, because of the persecution, we have almost nothing, right, musically that was written down. Because if you're being persecuted and you're being thrown to the lions or tigers in the Colosseum, the last thing you're going to do is to take time out of your day and write down some sacred music. Just not going to happen. So the first 300 years of Christianity, we have basically no reliable documentation that tells us what was going on at that time. But what we do have is after the Edict of Milan and Christianity becomes legitimized and it becomes a religion that is no longer officially persecuted, you end up with this big bloom, this wealth of documents which tells us what's going on in the church. And with the music, the sacred music, and what we understand, what we realize at this point is that the ancient Jewish system and then the ancient Greek system and the ancient Roman system, they all fused together in the early Christians to create a new system of music. What they ended up creating were these 8 church modes, which you probably don't know what a church mode is, and that's totally fine. But I bet you do know what a major scale and a minor scale is, right? So we have music in major, we have music in minor, but there are these other modes that music is written in. All of that comes from the early Christians, from the music that they were writing, these scales, a way of dividing the octave, or you can think like piano keys, like scales, right? So a music that is written by Kanye West or Taylor Swift or whoever it is actually uses scales that were created by the early Christians. So you fast forward from there, and then we get into Pope St. Gregory the Great and Charlemagne, and they were the ones so we have Christianity in every corner of the world, and it's spreading like wildfire, but they're all taking their notation and doing different things with it in Bulgaria and a different thing, than in Germany, whatever. So Pope St. Gregory the Great and Charlemagne get together, and in the 600s, 700s is roughly when this starts happening, and they start unifying the system, and that's where we get Gregorian chant. Pope St. Gregory the Great, Gregorian chant. This spreads out over all of the world, this unified system, and for the first time in human history, we have a musical language that is unified across cultures. It's just incredible to think about. This is handwritten, on skin of an animal and then passed down, to some other abbey, on some 4-week trip or 4-month trip across the sea or something, right? And so this musical system spreads over the entire world, this system that is unifying people across cultures. Before this, what we have is, we have our German musical language, and we have our Italian musical language, and we have our Bulgarian musical language, right? But we end up with a unified musical language, the musical language of the church, Gregorian chant, present across cultures.